Great Barrier Reef, but on reefs all around the world. And what that means is that if you start looking at the kind of articles we've put out much news articles about this that's been published rather widely, and there is kind of social activists that are trying to start campaigns, save the Great Barrier Reef, save the Great Barrier Reef, all over Facebook, Twitter, and various other groups. But the reality is that there is absolutely nothing that can be done to save the Great Barrier Reef, because it's a macro problem caused by overall climate change. So the thinking behind the Great Barrier Reef, if you understand that it is like the heart of the ocean. I mean, there nowhere else in the world is such a diverse, large kind of place in the ocean found with such a density of life. So in a way, it's like the heart of the ocean. When you and I don't know how old you are, but when most of us, a lot of us were born, the Great Barrier Reef was an abundant, beautiful place. And inside of our time, we're actually going to see the death of the heart of the ocean. And, no social activism is going to stop it. The only thing that is going to stop it is if we eventually kind of move away from this idea of climate change. But bearing in mind that 83% of the reef is already dead, the probability of us being able to stop it is almost zero. So then, sorry, I've just been corrected, it was 93% of the reef is dead. That's actually right. So then it brings us to another component. So now take that story and throw that story on one side of your mind, okay? And then it comes to another part of the story. Now they were looking, a study was recently done on what is causing ocean acidification. But while they were studying that, they were looking at oxygen levels inside of the ocean. Now, there is a relationship between the volume of plankton that is present in the water and their ability to sequester carbon dioxide. The ocean, despite what you may have heard, is actually the largest sequesterer of carbon dioxide. And when I say sequester, I mean that it takes in carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. So the ocean is actually the largest, what we call a carbon sink. So it's bigger than the rainforest, bigger than any other arboreal forest, it's bigger than anything that we have done. The ocean actually does most of the work. So most of the oxygen that you're breathing comes from the ocean. I'm going to come to that point in a little bit. I'm just going to explain a bit about the dynamics of what's happening in the ocean. So basically, plankton are responsible for bringing oxygen from the surface of the water, bringing carbon dioxide from the surface of the water, and they harness that as they keep the carbon, they release the oxygen. But because the top surface of the water has been heated, because of the amount of sunlight that is impacting on the ocean, the plankton are no longer able to reach the top surface of the water. And thus, even though they are still filtering some carbon dioxide that is resident, because that's what acidification is, it's an increase in carbon dioxide, it's mainly carbon that they're picking up, and there's less oxygen going around the ocean. So the report came out that basically said by 2030, you would start to see off all shores, or you would start to see obvious signs of lack of oxygen inside of the water. And there's another report that came out, but it's kind of minor by comparison, but it's still significantly important, is that the plankton is responsible for bringing that oxygen right from the top surface levels right to all the levels going down the marine chain as far as it can. And what this does is that it enables a healthy marine environment where creatures of all different kind of levels in the ocean are capable of eating or breathing. So with the loss of oxygen in the water, with the reduction in oxygen in the water, and with the growing kind of losses of oxygen in the water, the impact on marine life is projected to be devastating. Devastating. So what you're talking about is the loss of massive marine chains. So where you and I now can walk into the store and pick up like fish, a large proportion of those fish are they're dying. They're dying. So because they're just dying of suffocation, there is nothing for them to actually breathe. So the impacts, the knock-on effect impacts that this has is dramatic. So now if you take that and put that in the side as well, along with our little story about the Great Barrier Reef, what you're left with is an interesting little study that's been done, and something that we've actually here at Brave Green World, we've been monitoring for quite some time. In fact, it was a question that was raised a while back. When you were in school, you got taught, so you said, like, how much oxygen is actually in the atmosphere, okay? So the common phrase that we throw around is 21%. 21% of oxygen is available in the atmosphere, which means that for every breath that you take, you're taking in some helium, some argon, some oxygen, but of that, 21% is actually oxygen. Now, if you understand the fundamentals of climate change, what they're saying is that there's an increase in carbon dioxide. So from combustion, like we're burning carbon, from kind of, exhaust, carbon monoxide. So from all of these things, there is a combustion process that's taking. It's what's called oxidization, which means that in order to release carbon in the form of smoke or byproduct, it has to attach itself to an oxygen so that it becomes lighter and it floats up. So that's how you get carbon dioxide, which means that there's a direct mathematical relationship between the volume of carbon dioxide versus the volume of oxygen. So some studies were done about this because what we wanted to find out was what is the actual oxygen. You can't have an increase in carbon dioxide without having a corresponding decrease in oxygen. So we wanted to see what studies were done in relation to the amount of atmospheric oxygen that's available. And so far, the results are kind of sketchy. Scientists actually blatantly stated in the document that they just don't know. So they've done some recordings. Some cities, they've picked up oxygen contents as low as 14%, some as low as 17%. And these are just patches. If you imagine patches floating around above cities that are deoxygenated. And now you can see it all starts to make sense. Inside of your ocean, you're now getting patches of loss of oxygen. Inside of your atmosphere, you're getting loss of oxygen. And those same losses of oxygen are starting to have an impact on the marine ecosystem, which is in turn having an impact on what you're seeing in the Great Barrier Reef. And so, for the first time, actually, all the little pieces of a puzzle are starting to coalesce into one big story. And that story is happening right now. Right now, as I say this, it's happening. And what are you and I really capable of doing about it? Nothing. What are you and I capable of bringing about some kind of change that will affect it? We are powerful. But this has got to be bigger than some social media campaign. This has got to be a fundamental change in the way that we're going about doing business. What it means is that there's greater level of sunlight that is hitting the ocean. The ocean is absorbing more heat because all it is really energy transfer. So there is more energy inside of our atmospheric system than there is outside of our atmospheric system. And what that does is it starts to heat up the top surface of the water. And because the top surface of water begins to heat up, what it really does is anything. It's the same thing that happens with any water. If you heat up water, it expands. As there's more energy absorbed by the ocean, there's lower oxygen inside of the ocean. There's greater ocean acidification, which is reducing plankton. And ultimately, it is now starting to have an impact not only on marine-based kind of oxygen levels, but also on atmospheric-based oxygen levels. And this is a story that is actually more serious than anything you're going to hear. It's more serious than anything that you're going to read. It's more serious than anything that you're actually going to uncover this week. And you can put it in your head, you can do what you like with it. But the fact is that if you take a look, and I'm just going to reiterate why ENN is actually important. If you look at what the news was covering inside of this week, we covered things on CNN like Trump. We covered a whole lot of rubbish that's related to events on the field. But why is nobody talking about this? Because this, in your lifetime, no longer is it 2100, the fame, this is when we'll see the effects of climate change. We're talking something that is only 14 years away before you are going to see significant changes in the oxygen content of the surface of the ocean, and thus it's going to impact those that eat seafood. It's going to impact the entire marine chain, and it's going to impact oxygen levels. And when scientists were asked, what happens if the oxygen levels get to a low point? What is the net effect? What is the safety level for human beings? You know what they said? They don't know. They don't know. Now think about that. Just put that in the back of your head. Remember, for all of you that are going to be watching Donald Trump go on and attack Hillary Clinton, and you're going to watch Bernie Sanders try climb all over Clinton and how important that is, the reality is that day by day, the oxygen content of this atmosphere that you're relying on to watch those things is actually running out. So I want to thank you for your time in watching ENN. Remember that this is the channel that is going to bring you actual news, real news, that's actually important to you and actually has meaning to not only you but everybody else on Earth. ENN is the one channel where you're going to actually find out the things that are important. So thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.
When I start these presentations and I'm talking to police colleagues at Interpol, I usually leave the F word out until the last thing, because they don't understand the F word. So I start by describing the type of organised crime network, and it will be a network with beneficial owners in Europe, potentially Spain. The insurers of that business in the UK, for example, the banks in Central Europe, the incorporated companies in Central America or offshore tax jurisdictions. The business is supported by labour from Indonesia. They conduct their outputs from their business activities, exported into Southeast Asian countries. The offices of the company come from countries such as Spain, Chile, Portugal, Peru, and Ukraine. And their markets are in Thailand, Vietnam, China, and the US. And then you ask them, what do you think I'm talking about? And when you say fish, they go, what? Okay. It's a job to convince police. Now, Interpol's, what Interpol depends on is the National Central Bureau point of contact. The National Central Bureau point of contact needs to establish relationships with all the national law enforcement agencies who are dealing with this area. And quite frequently, many of those agencies have never sat down together and talked. So we call that an environmental security seminar with a fisheries focus. The fisheries crime types are quite simply, we've heard a list on several occasions. I'm going to give you some real examples from the Antarctic operations. These operations have been being conducted for over 2 years, nearly 2 years now, with a number of groups of countries exchanging intelligence and information, which came to a bit of a head when Sea Shepherd started chasing the thunder. The standard crime types are, of course, abuse of the registries, we've heard from Nigeria, customs frauds, financial frauds, insurance frauds, breaches of national, administrative and criminal law, and breaches of national law by nationals. It's important, although I'm talking about toothfish, what's the connection to Africa? Well, the connection to Africa is that the registries of Equatorial Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Nigeria were abused. The criminals are very clever. They know where these weaknesses are. And one key thing that protects them is that we don't communicate with each other effectively over law enforcement. That's their key advantage. The modus operandi is frequent changes of name and identity, changes of ownership, the national registry abuses, the gaps, exploiting the gaps, for example, in the Nigerian fisheries legislation, and the lack of effective monitoring capability if a vessel never goes to your port. Licensing abuses, many examples of fraudulent licenses I've come across. Duncan's mentioned those. I've worked with Duncan for a few years when I was in the UK, and we were, the ease with which licenses can be forged is it's very easy, and it's difficult to provide documents that can be verified. And there's another key issue. If your documents are presented to you in a port, how do you verify that with the country who issued them? So these are the 6 vessels. 5 of them have purple notices on them. The Thunder at the top, and in the middle you'll see an analytical intelligence product that shows, obviously it's blurred, but it starts to show the type of tools and services we can offer. We do intelligence analysis, and which is starting to connect all of these vessels together. I have to say that when the Sea Shepherd chase kicked off in December, that started us off on a lot of work in Interpol. But for every hour we were in the office late at night working at weekends, there was 1,000 hours of work going on out at sea, by Australia, in Malaysia and Thailand, by Sea Shepherd as well, of course, in grueling Antarctic conditions. I know I've worked in the Antarctic, long spells of boredom, in the trust that there will be an enforcement outcome in this. Let me reassure everybody, including our friends from the press, that we were on the case the whole time, as were all those other countries. We've been engaging in extremely expensive, time-consuming operations. The Thunder's at the bottom of the sea. All of these vessels have been arrested. Some have been released because the judicial process has been exhausted. So what did Interpol do? Since the 16th of December last year, we were following it. What we do is we send out through our national central bureaus the I-24/7 notices to all the countries concerned where we thought the Thunder might go. This triggers a response from those countries if the vessel goes near them. But more importantly, what we also know, apart from governments, apart from Sea Shepherd and civil society, there are other networks within networks who are collaborating, such as Stop Illegal Fishing, Trig Map Tracking, and the task forces, who are collaborating on the ground and they are aware also of what's going on, and they know there is a law enforcement response in the offing, and the Interpol approach means that people have confidence that there is a concerted effort going on, even if it isn't apparent at the time. So, the Thunder set off. We were watching it the whole time, weekly conference calls. As you see it dithering about to the south of South Africa here, we wondered what it was trying to do. We were alerting all the authorities up the Mozambique Channel, including all the French territories and overseas departments. He snaked up between the French territories here and eventually decided to make a run for it up to Sao Tome. In Sao Tome, it was no coincidence that there was a concerted enforcement response in Sao Tome. We sent an investigation support team there, which ensured that rather than getting off the boat and flying home and filing their insurance claim, they were met with a coordinated law enforcement response, which is part in part coordinated by Interpol, and including the Nigerian Maritime Rescue Services, because of the coordinated efforts of the Anti-Piracy Centre in Ghana. Secondly, in Europe, what we did after the after the Sam Simon had dropped off the fishing gear seized from the ocean in Mauritius, and he went round and supported Bob Barker in the rescue of the crew from the Thunder. They then took the evidence that they had collected from the boarding and from the sea to Germany. At that point, Interpol had arranged with NCB Wiesbaden and Bremen police to take that evidence into a chain of custody. That chain of custody, the evidence was then taken to Amsterdam, where it was handed over as police evidence to the Sao Tome authorities, where it was used in is used in evidence. In Amsterdam, Interpol sent an analyst to the Sao Tome embassy, and we had some Canadian digital forensic computing assistance there as well as a result of the operations, and that evidence has been evaluated and it will be used in further investigations. We also sent an investigation team to Sao Tome itself with a human trafficking officer to interview the Indonesian crew from Interpol, with an Indonesian speaker from NCB Lisbon, and with our criminal intelligence officer. So going quickly to Malaysia and Cape Verde, Malaysia, Thailand and Indonesia have been outstanding in their support to Australia under the Regional Fisheries Partnership Agreement, have been key players in this fight. This interesting thing here. Here is the Purlon, fined $2.5 million, by the way, by the Malaysian authorities. He's discharging to a barge. Discharge from the Purlon was illegal under Malaysian law. The acceptance of the fish on the barge, on the containers, which you can see here, that was illegal under Malaysian law. But the acceptance of the fish on the barge was illegal under Singaporean law because it was a food product, and that was forbidden under the sanitation regulations. In Thailand, the investigations were into the customs fraud. They declared grouper to the customs authorities instead of toothfish. There's our team working in Sao Tome, helping the authorities with the interviews of the crew and officers who are on trial, and we expect a verdict on that soon. Here's the team in the embassy in Sao Tome in Amsterdam with our Canadian colleagues, looking at all the evidence brought back from Germany. And here's the investigation support team in Mauritius. Another key element of our strategy is we hold regional investigative and analytical case meetings. In this case, we held one in Singapore, where we got the 9 countries in that region who have been involved in the operation together to exchange evidence, leading to mutual administrative and mutual legal assistance measures for to give intelligence and documentary material status as evidence for prosecution. This is an example of the type of analytical product we intend to. This is being developed all the time as a result of new intelligence that's coming in. And in December, we're going to hold another regional case conference in Lyon, bringing together our Northern Hemisphere partners, including Sao Tome, Cape Verde, where the Yongding and Songhua are currently detained. So what's quickly, our role here is that inside these red boxes are intelligence that would not have been communicated to any other red box without the existence of Interpol. Some bilateral relations will occur outside the Interpol channels through diplomatic methods and other mutual legal assistance, and that's perfectly acceptable. That's a really good way, because that's how, in fact, we got Spain to join in and start working in the regional case conferences, because there were, the evidence being given to them was so useful to their cases. And this is ongoing investigations. So these are the 20-odd countries where there are investigations ongoing, completed prosecutions, or there have been intelligence exchanges, or who have contributed ships and aircraft to do surveillance, or in the case of Australia, 3 actual boardings which seized material which has been, and then found material which has been useful to other investigations. So the lessons: it's been an extremely expensive operation. It's unsustainable. We have to find different ways of doing it. We cannot be spending, literally $5 to $10 million patrolling these seas for 5 years, 5 to 10 years on one single organised crime network, because there are many others, and many of them are much, much bigger. We must try and find some deterrence, disruption and prevention strategies, which mean we don't have to spend all this money on actual boots on the ground, ships at sea, surveillance, and really, really complex investigation. Fisheries jurisdiction alone runs out of road. We have to cut away at their business model. In the UK, the insurance investigation, the insurers of the nine of the vessels were found to be insured by the same company in the UK. All insurance cover was immediately taken away from those companies, from the vessels, 9 of the blacklisted vessels, and now the UK are in a process of working with the insurance industry in the UK to ensure that they understand how they should not insure these vessels in the future to protect themselves. We need to attack all the crimes and all the offending, and I hope I've given you a few examples of that in my presentation. I refer to the Al Capone strategy and the death by 1,000 cuts. We need multi-agency approaches. We need single points of contact with enforcement networks that can be got in touch with by the NCBs, and we need some more sophisticated IT solutions adapted to the operational requirements, whether it's a slow burn intelligence collection operation or it's actually a fast tempoed seizure, or we were expecting the Thunder to make landfall in about 3 weeks. And so we had an operational plan in place, and at the time we had a decent platform for that operational exchange. It became a question of making telephone calls. So that's what we do. Thank you very much.
My story is going to begin, and you need to draw a little mental picture of this, of a stream somewhere up in the mountains. Could be any mountains, anywhere. And a group of people are told that this particular stream, where this valley is and that those mountains, is absolutely one of the most scenic areas in the whole world. And so they get together and decide to travel and visit the stream and do this wonderful hike in nature. So they travel right across continents with all their gear. They move by rail and train, bus, whatever, and they get to this wonderful scenic scene, and they start their walk. And right beside them is this little stream coming down off the mountain. This little stream, at that point, is basically pristine. It has very, very, very little sign of any nutrient, of any pollution. And the hikers walk along and the scenes are magic. And of course it's a hot day, so they put on suntan lotion and creams on their lips. And as would be the case, it gets hotter and hotter, so they decide to have a swim in one of the pools that this little stream has. So off they go and have a swim. And now they wash off the suntan lotion and all the creams that they've been having smeared over their bodies. And on top of that, they actually also release some body fluids into that stream. After all, it's in the middle of nowhere, so who's it going to affect? I mean, it's just a few of us here, you know. It's going to be washed away. It'll be just dissipated in the mass of water. However, some of the party have been taking some antibiotics. Some of the ladies are on birth control tablets. And some of them actually have a urinary disease. And so at that point, they introduce what would be the first beginnings of pollution and toxic elements. And this is where the memory begins. That stream takes that little plug of the first pollutant and the first nutrients and takes it on its way down the mountain. And so the hikers carry on hiking, they finish their hike, and they end up at a village. And this village is very rural, it has the most rudimentary sewage systems, but again, they note that this sewage system discharges into the same stream that they have just been walking along. And so the nutrient levels increase. And as they walk down the valley, so the villages get larger and larger, and then they come into an agricultural area, and they see the farmers are busy farming away, and they are spraying their crops with water from the stream. But they also notice that there's some machines growing up and down spraying pesticide. And again, this is washed off into this little stream. So the memory in the stream, this water, is actually carrying all these bits of memory down, all the way down to where it eventually will end up, either in a great big dam or out into the sea. Now we think that, you know, the water will wash away the sins of the world, but it really doesn't anymore. It may have done so many hundreds of years ago, but it doesn't do that anymore. Because what we are actually producing in terms of our toxic, and I'll put it in inverted commas, our toxic chemicals are today so potent and are so powerful that they have an enormous effect when released into nature. There are, I think, 6 rivers in England that are highly protected. All the people that live along the banks of those rivers have to sign and agree that they will do absolutely nothing to damage the river. And about 2 years ago, I think, someone released about 2 or 3 tablespoons of a toxic poison into the river. It ended up killing every bit of marine life, fish life, for a distance of over 6 miles down that river. And that was literally from 1 or 2 tablespoons of toxic. So we produce all these chemicals, and we actually don't really fully understand, in all our cleverness, we don't really fully understand what happens when they are unleashed into nature. So the memory I'm talking about is really how water will carry down and along its path what we do on its banks. And today, facing probably 70% of the dams is this huge problem of cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria, or blue algae as it's commonly known, will become prevalent because it is fed. It is fed by over fertilization on farmers' lands, high volumes of nitrates and phosphates running off the fields into the stream, and from there into the dam. And I think you might remember just recently, one of the big lakes, one of the cities off the big lake, they suddenly had a cyanobacteria bloom, and they had to, I think there were 500,000 people or 600,000 people that had to be told immediately not to use any water out of their taps. And they had to bring the army in and tanker water, and this would be a modern American city. So it can happen anywhere. It can be really simple, everyday precautions that we can take to minimize. At this stage, the message that I think needs to get across is, how do we minimize this memory? How do we make that memory as small as possible? And this goes right into the rural villages, it goes into the cities, it goes into every tier of humanity. that we have to start to change the way that we actually consider water. Today, water has been made very ubiquitous to large, or the availability of very ubiquitous to almost all of humanity. But what I was actually amazed to read or hear on the news just a couple of days ago, it's now World Water Week at the moment, and 4 countries in the world use 60% of all the drinking water available. China being one of them, India being another, obviously massive population, America being another. And the rest of the world, take those countries away, are down to the other 40%. Agriculture uses about 48%, and human consumption requires approximately 12%. So there are at the moment massive amounts of water that are being used within certain spheres or in certain tiers. And if that memory goes into those, that effect on that becomes that much greater. If we look at the sewage systems of the world that are still discharging massive amount of sewage, we're discharging over 786,000 tons of effluent into the seas on our coast in South Africa per day. Well, the days of that being dissipated and gone, I'm afraid, are just not happening, because the toxicity levels of those discharges are so high that you can't tell the fish, well, sorry, there's that bubble of toxicity, don't swim in that. That fish is going to swim through that. And of course we know that mercury is so high now that there are some places that are advocating you only have fish once a month because the mercury levels have become so high. Now that is indicative of the fact that the water is actually not able to dissipate, or the sheer population numbers are so great that we are not dissipating or able to dissipate the mercury in a small enough quantity for it to be safe, because it gets into the fish and there it remains in the flesh. So if we talk about memory, what I want to put across here is that if we consider how we behave and how we treat water, we need to understand that what we do to that water, we don't damage the water. H2O is H2O. We can pour it down the side of a mountain for thousands of feet and bash it off the rocks and it still comes up as water at the bottom. We can boil it and steam it away. It'll just reconstitute again. So we don't actually damage the H2O. What damage we do is what we add to the H2O. And that is not fully appreciated in many, many instances. So cities now will have to start changing, where they can't have a simple system whereby they create the mess and we dump it into the river, it disappears into the sea. Cities are going to have to change. They're going to have to become circular. In other words, where they are creating the waste, it no longer gets into any water body. It is dealt with separately. It is taken out and treated, and actually then put back into the farming around it. So you create a circular operation which will absorb and dissipate into the soil for plant to take up the nutrients of phosphates and nitrates. And so the fundamentals are like that have got to happen. Minimizing. To me, that is what's got to start being looked at. And that message is very straightforward to put across to the most rural community. From there upwards can be put across. The fact that we can just go to a tap and turn the tap open and wash away everything and say, oh, well, the sewage works are going to handle it. Well, that's starting to become a major problem. And sewage works, which are very efficient, are themselves struggling now to be able to handle these high levels. And certainly there's technology coming out to help to do that. But it would be necessary, I think, to have a two-pronged attack where the actual originator of the memory must start to think about minimizing it and keeping and look and see what they are doing. Can we use a different product which is more organic rather than inorganic? Or can we use, do we have to put so much on our face? Can we perhaps not have it? Can we put it on every second day? Can we change our thinking about that whole aspect of putting these memory chips, as it were, into the water? And that has to happen, because we're running out of water. I do know that ozone is probably in fact, it is the best disinfectant that we know of. It takes out all bacteria. It cleans water like you would not believe. I mean, it's just unbelievable. We introduced ozone in the Middle East to clean grey water, and it really, if you study it on ozone, it's incredible, and it's very easy to actually work with. If it can be dangerous in a closed room if you walk in and you haven't taken the necessary precautions, but no one would ever do that. Or certainly, if you had a plant like that, you'd have a warning system that would as soon as the ozone level reached a certain point, it would switch off. But ozone dissipates very, very quickly. It stays in the water, very cold water, for maybe 10 or 15 or 20 minutes at most. It then dissipates completely into the atmosphere. But while it's doing that, it will remove as near as 99% of everything that you can possibly think of. Pesticides, all the chemicals, the whole works. And that is quite easy to use. And it's becoming now very easy to put into your home. So what is happening is, for instance, that water in the mountains that has come down with all these memory bits and pieces and is treated, is delivered through the pipeline to your house. And it is deemed as being suitable for drinking. But to do so, they've had to put in chlorine to keep you disinfected all the way to where you are, because chlorine has a long residual time in the pipework. And so therefore, from time to time, they get the mixture wrong, because there's people using a lot of water some days on a hot day, then they don't use so much. So it's quite difficult to actually fine-tune the amount of chlorine. So they tend to overdose, and sometimes if you have a shower, you'll smell the chlorine, or you boil a kettle of water and make some tea and it tastes awful because the chlorine's gone up. So we ozonate all our water now for our house, even though it has been proved to be absolutely perfect for drinking. Of course, if we go further and we say, well, let's look at what happens on a typical farm where they are spraying and putting in pesticides, and then they're putting in nutrients. I think that it is reasonable to conclude that we are over spraying both. We are over putting nutrients in, and we're over watering. And so therefore the technology and the nature, when nature is actually raining somewhere and the forests are growing or the grasslands are growing, one can very, very quickly measure the amount of water that's being put down by nature, and we look around us and we see, goodness me, all these trees are growing and all the grasses are growing, and so on and so forth, and there's no one's putting any nitrates or phosphates in. It's a natural balance. All right, there'll be the droppings from animals that will add to that, and so on and so forth. But in the farming, we tend to say, no, we've got to put in all these excess, and so we have to start to learn from nature and use nature to find the solutions. And we might err incorrectly, not have a very good yield. Then we would have to go back again and rebalance. It's not going to be a one-off, we get it right the first time. But if we take England now, they finally are going to allow the use of pesticides, because they were told that if you don't use it, you're going to lose your crops. Well, that's almost like putting a gun to the government's head. You're going to lose your crops, and the people are going to starve. But where's the third solution, the third option? In everything, there's always many options. Use the pesticide, or don't use the pesticide, or use only some of the pesticide in low level. And I think it would have been appropriate for the government to say, well, okay, you say we're going to lose our crops, but let us legislate that in 1 or 2 counties they will use no pesticide. Plant ordinarily, and if there's a failure, the government will come to the party and say, look, we made a mistake. We will recompense the farmer, so that the farmer's not taking the brunt of it. And then you run that parallel, and you see, well, that county, they used pesticide. This county, they didn't use pesticide. Oh my goodness, they didn't lose the crop. Then you have an ability to do the measuring. And then maybe another county, you say, well, allow 50% of the crop. So you balance out until you find, and you minimize and minimize and minimize. But right now, It's an all or nothing, and they get scared to hell about this, and so virtually a gun is held to the head of the decision makers. And even though there were some 200 scientific papers presented to prove that this wouldn't happen, the decision that Britain took, very, very worryingly, is to carry on and use the pesticide. There's no straightforward answer to that one, because we've done so many damaging things that we can't actually say, well, that damaging thing has done the whole damage. We've damaged all over. We've done damage hundreds of kilometers away to something we've removed, like we've removed forest areas, and then we've had a water problem, 400 or 500 kilometers away, and the relationship between the two. So, oh yes, we don't have any rain here now because we felled the trees 400 or 500 kilometers away. But if we go back to nature, and you look at a simple tree, and how it transpires and it draws water, transpires, it creates a whole system of continuity. All the time we are breaking this continuity down. We are very deft as humans to break nature's continuity. And we need to go back again and look at re-establishing nature's continuity. And so if we look at the cry, well, we had to do this because we got to feed the millions or the billions. You take that at face value to start off with and say, well, fine, but then we need to also take an area and start to re-establish what was removed from there. And that is where Luke was explaining with his seeds, for instance, how that can be done. And it's going to take a gargantuan effort. You might put down 10,000 of those seeds and only get maybe 1,000 finally germinate in the first year or the second year. But if we don't do that, if we don't start to actually move, and I'm not talking about trying to turn the desert into a forest, that to me is not right. A desert is a desert because you have more loss than you have gain, period. But on the fringes of where the desert is, on the edges of that, where the desert has been allowed to increase beyond what it would have been X number of years ago, those are the fringe areas that have to be reconditioned. So we really have to take a book out of nature. I mean, a leaf is the most perfect factory. It does everything. And so if we can create more leaves, then we will start to correct the amount of water. Global warming or not, the weathers have changed. It's warming. Even there's an article now given on the effect of El Nino that's going to have on the whole of southern Africa. Zimbabwe is a basket case from a food point of view, total basket case. Zambia is similar. South Africa is going to be hit by El Nino. And this is likely to happen for the next 6 to 8 months. That is going to happen. It might last longer, even into 18 months they're worried about. Now, El Nino is not a new thing. It's happened cyclically over goodness knows how long, go back. And that energy that El Nino has, where the water temperature in the ocean is maybe a half a degree higher than it would normally be, but is spread over such an enormous area, represents so much energy that we can't even begin to calculate how much of an engine that is in driving the weather. The natural effects of warming have been around for a long, long time. The corals show us that. There's plenty of evidence of that. So tackling global warming and so on and so forth, I think has to be done in a number of facets. We know that the carbon dioxide is the major issue, and that has to be reduced dramatically. But right away, I would believe that I would start a whole process of planting, slowly but surely, in the rural areas, and reclaiming. Even if you had to reclaim a half a kilometer of that desert advance in 1 year, that would be an enormous gain. If we look at the diseases, and we just take one disease as a particular problem at this point, is American foul brood. And we look at what this has done and how it has devastated bee colonies all over the world. I was quite interested to read that Aristotle, in his notes, mentioned that he came across hives that were really smelly. And there's now thinking that maybe AFB goes back even as far as to that time. Certainly AFB has been known about since about 1908, I think, if not even before that. And looking at records of the smell, because that's what is called foul brood, it stinks. But if we look at this in terms of our food aspect again, and I'm talking about this issue of intensive versus extensive, the farming in terms of pollination has become to the point whereby bees are brought in to do the pollination and the bees are taken out once the pollination happens. And they're taken out because there is simply nothing left for them to eat, to live on. There's no more pollen and there's no more nectar because the farm is absolutely devoid of any other plant. Only that crop is planted. Many of those crops the bees actually don't like. If they had preference to go to this particular, like for instance, almond tree, or went to another weed that was growing down there, they'd rather go to the weed because it was much nicer for them than the almond. But there is no weed, so they have to go to the almond. And we are looking now here at about a 40% loss of swarms available for pollination. And it's regarded that the number is about 65,000 swarms necessary to do the pollination for our fruit industry here. Now, some of the bees will be moved twice. In other words, they will pollinate the early blossomers, and then they will be moved into the later blossomers. So you might have your pears and plums, I think, at first, and then they might move to the apples or whatever. So the actual numbers are probably around about 50,000, and there's a 40% loss on that. Right now, we're looking at an industry that employs 65,000 people here and brings in billions of forex. And as exchange rate at the moment would go, this would mean a lot of money and a huge loss in South Africa. Now we come back again to this issue of the water aspect about it. Bees require water. They have to have some water. And so if we mistreat our water system, we are going to affect not just the bees but all insects, a whole range of insects. And if we if we look at the matter of the stress that the bee comes on, there has been a number of studies done, and one of the factors is the stressing of the bees. And now that we have this American foul brood, we are expected to open the hives up and go right down into the brood chamber where the queen is, and right into her parlor, and take those brood frames out and examine them to see if there's any sign of AFB. She doesn't like that. So we are putting additional stress onto the swarms, and that stress in itself also then manifests as another symptom of ill health for the bees. So we look now at what is happening in terms of trying to contain this. And there are a number of things being done, from actually burning the entire swarm, if you find it as AFB, actually obliterating it. That is legislation in some countries. You actually completely wipe out the swarm. Other countries will allow antibiotics to be used. Can you believe that? Antibiotics, and that gets into the honey, gets into the population. So you find America, meat and poultry is riddled with antibiotics and with hormones. The problem is that is not actually happening ahead of the problem. It's just pouring cold water on the fire, as it were. Here it's illegal, and so hopefully the beekeepers here will adhere to the legislation. The interesting thing that we spoke about at the meeting on Saturday was what I call the coarse resolution of the symptoms. I gave a little talk on what I regard as the lower resolution. The little cell where the AFB occurs comes about because the queen lays the egg in the cell, the cell is filled with some worker jelly, and because there's some AV spores on the hairs of the nurse bee, there'll be X number of spores introduced into that worker jelly, and the larva then hatches and starts to consume that jelly, and at a certain point the nurse bees will cap the cell. While that larva is growing bigger and bigger, it is excreting, and it's the excretia from the larva that triggers the spore into a bacteria. The spore can lie dormant for 40 or 50 years, no problem. The bacteria then attacks the little larva and consumes whatever royal jelly is left over, and at the point where all the food or the nutrient in that cell is at its absolute end, the bacteria suddenly switch state and they produce upwards of 2 billion spores in one cell. And I said to them, you know, we talk about billions, like we roll it off the tip of our tongue, or we roll a million off our tongue, but let's just consider what is a billion, or 2 billion. 2 million is 2 with 6 noughts. 2 billion is 2 with 9 noughts. Now, can you imagine how minute that little spore is, that 2 billion of them can fit inside a little cell which is only about 4 millimeters across and maybe 15 or 16 millimeters deep. Then what happens is this little larva dies, and the nurse bees realize something's wrong, and they then open the little capping to see what's gone wrong, and hey presto, you released 2 billion spores from one cell into the hive. They dutifully go and clean it all out, try and remove the little dead piece of larva that's left over, making it ready for the queen to come in and lay the next egg and start the whole process again. So what happens is the hive dies out because there are there's a reduction in the number of little babies coming up and becoming adults. Eventually the hive will die, and that's the end of that hive. In the dying process, of course, other bees will come along and rob that hive, because they are very opportunistic. They will go for a hive, and if there aren't sufficient retaliation, bees coming out, they'll go right in and they'll rob that hive. And of course they go in there, and it's all covered with that. Nature moves things around unbelievably efficiently. So while we are concentrating on what I call the coarser resolution of bits and pieces, we need to look at the finer resolutions. And I think that's where we've lost the plot. We don't actually sit down and have a scientific body that looks down, way down at the low resolution.
This case started with civil society. In other words, we dealt with an informant in this case. This case would most probably have never been if it wasn't for that individual that provided that first information of the crime. Now, that individual also provided the information on 3 prior cases, but he provided the information to the wrong people. The 14 officials that were corrupted within the case. And the information went to the officials, back to Arnold Benches and his crew. Now you know, we received that information and we've made it a success story. But we couldn't have done that on our own. J.D. Kotze, he's here. He was the head investigator of the Scorpions at the time. Brilliant, excellent investigative skills and capacity. they took the case to the next level. The Asset Forfeiture Unit, the National Prosecuting Authority, the Department of Justice in South Africa, the US attorneys, Marcus Asner, the first prosecutor prosecuting this case. He's present in this room. An honor and a privilege to have all the role players here today. He's here today. He played a crucial role. What I'm trying to illustrate is, it cannot be one person's work. One person, in 1990, I started in this work. Then you could work alone on the coast, everywhere. You could work alone then, not now. Fisheries crime is organized crime. Now, there's the US attorneys, the US customs. We went over. You couldn't believe it. We worked with NOAA in 2001. We're busy with a second case similar to Hot Bay. We cannot talk about it because the case is current. But the level of cooperation, unheard of. Both customs, I mean, you pick up a phone. There's no MLAT in place. We're still busy. It's taking us almost 2 years to get the MLAT, the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty in place. But I pick up a phone, and believe you me, within a few hours from the US, the United States, we'll get a document, and we can start working on it. And that's a type of cooperation, and those are the agencies that cooperated to make this case a success. I've briefly touched on the successes. If you look at the case started, when we got that first information of the crime, there was Patagonian toothfish, South Coast rock lobster, West Coast rock lobster tails within the container. A second container was intercepted in the US. South Africa had a plea agreement with the accused in South Africa, only, not for the entire period of destruction or mass illegal harvesting, but only for a 2-year period. And that is one of the lessons that we can learn from this case, is don't go back where they started their illicit activities. You start the last 2 years. We're busy now, I touched on a case, we're busy with a case where we went right back, you know. And yes, it's good to do that as well, to illustrate the extent of the damage done. But we only did, went back in this case for 2 years. And the outcome in South Africa was fines and forfeiture in excess of 44 million South African rand. It still remains the biggest case ever. But the US did an excellent job, and they put the main culprit in prison. If I may mention his name, Arnold Benzis. And you know, I always tell the new or the younger FCOs, fishery control officers, I always say, you know, I saw Dennis Fredericks was here yesterday. I don't know if he's here today, but the two of us, and Dennis was our legal man at the time, and the two of us confronted Arnold Benzis. Now, he corrupted 14 officials in this case. And on this specific day, I stood in front of him. I can't recall what I said, but I can't recall the words that I said, but I think it must have been something like, this is it. This is your takedown. And it must have been something to that effect. But the success story about this, I've got 2 pictures in here. One of the photographs was taken in 2001. That is when Hout Bay fishing was surveilled by us, the department, trying to build a case at the time. And just below that, we've got a photograph just below that with the South African coat of arms on the same building. This needs to be our story. Our story where we converted a crime scene into a government building. You know, and every time when I walk into that building, I get almost emotional, and my colleagues don't understand. But there's a lot of history behind this building, and you know, Ironically, this is also the building. Today there's a Pakisa meeting. Now Pakisa means hurry up. And the Pakisa project, Initiative 5, Marine Protection Service and Governance. It's a new project, if I can put it like that, an initiative by government driven by the President of South Africa. We instructed government, you will work as one unit, fighting maritime crime, fisheries crime, and unlocking the economic potential of the ocean. Now that's the Hout Bay fishing case. What was also good, not illustrating the excellent operations, but what was also good was the South Coast Rock Lobster at the time was in threat, was under tremendous pressure because of this company overfishing. When we took them up, I believe still till today, that resource has turned around and has displayed a positive growth. And that is what we need to do, not only to abalone, rock lobster, but all the other resources as well. You know, within South Africa, there are multiple cases. Today, there are 3 cases within the High Court. Also another process of unheard of work, where there are 3 cases currently running within the High Court in South Africa. They are abalone cases, but they syndicate-related organized crime cases where I cannot talk on it, they're current, but from the attorneys who represented the suspects or the accused in some of the cases, even them are charged, or at least one is charged in this case. And you know, we've got numerous successes, foreign vessels, foreign fishing vessels, we're closing illegal fish processing establishments, and at times seize in excess of 100 tons of abalone per annum. That's not good enough. And never have we ever, until 2006, addressed, although we've tried, but we just couldn't break through to the illegal consignment. And in 2006, we had this specific case, also with joint partners. We searched the cold storage, a stone throw from where we're gathering today, and we seized a number of abalone in this premises. We did a forensic investigation and we found, and a very fast one, because you cannot take months, you know, in the evening. And we found consignments 3, 4, 5, and 6 en route to Malaysia and Singapore and destined for Hong Kong. We returned all of them successfully, and this is one of the marked cases where we developed the process of getting those illegal consignments back to South Africa. You cannot turn that. It is the Cape Town Bridge. We were so excited that vessel came in Durban. We waited for that vessel to come in Durban because we were cautious of the syndicate members getting hold of the containers. But you cannot turn a ship like that around, a multi-million-dollar ship. But we've developed the method of getting the containers. But the value of it was 11 million rand South African value. If that had to be sold, it would have been sold for 66 million, between 66 and 100 million in the Far East. Same. We've consignment 7 and 8. A premises here in Table View was searched, also a legal abalone processing establishment. And we found abalone to the value of 5 million rand at this premises. And we did the same. We went through the documentation. We went through all. If there's a name, if there's a IP address or anything, we would go through, and we found these containers en route. It didn't reach its destination in Hong Kong, but we got it back, and the previous one that I mentioned was exported illegally as pilchards. Now, if somebody exports pilchards, it would have been fine at the time because you didn't need an export permit for the pilchards at the time. We've closed that gap that you need a permit for any fish. But it was exported as pilchard. These consignments were exported as polypropylene pellets. And I'm not going to repeat the figures, you can actually see it up there. But there were a total of 18 of those bales, each bale weighing 1 ton, containing, so it was about 18, 19 tons of polypropylene pellets. Now you can imagine a normal FCO fishery control officer. How is he to inspect that container? And if you do inspect it, you need a forklift to unpack it. If you unpack it, polypropylene pellets flows like water if you open that bag. You search, you find nothing. Only 8 of those bags had the abalone in. So it just shows you the extent that they actually go to. I'm only touching on a few cases, and this is also one of significance, is also through the information network, we've learned that the AFCD, the Agriculture and Fisheries Department of and Conservation Department of the Administrative Region in Hong Kong seized the container, and that's all we had. And we picked up the phone. Marcus Bergner put us in contact with Charles Kuhn of the AFCD, and we got his phone number and we phoned him, and he said, no, it's not him, it's at the Maritime and Customs Command. And we phoned and we never stopped. And we told them, listen here, do you have a container? Yes, we do. And but that container is illegal. It's people have been deprived of a livelihood, and we told them the truth. And they started cooperating with us. And through the information that we received from Hong Kong, we found that the same syndicate sent another container through. We intercepted that container and returned it successfully. What was interesting in this case, and I must mention it, is that we valued that abalone at about just over 2 million, about 7 million South African rand. The Hong Kong authorities, the independent auditor, they valued the same container, which we returned successfully to South Africa at over 27 million South African rand. At that time, the Hong Kong dollar was almost similar to the South African rand. And the accused, they were going to fight this case. And we arrived at this court here, the Chu Sen Magistrates Court in Hong Kong. And we thought, you always hear of an official committed suicide flying out of a building in Hong Kong. And we thought of something like that, and we thought, no, we need to take state security, we need to take the police with it. And at the end, we were only 2 officials, and we went to fight that case, and we got a conviction. And yes, I think it was 2 weeks later, that same group that you're seeing there of the Ports and Maritime Command, they had a massive success of ivory and rhino horn imported illegally into Hong Kong. Somebody mentioned yesterday we need to extend the cooperation. Where is Hong Kong? Where's mainland China? Where's Taiwan? Anybody here? Anybody from the Far East? That's one of our challenges. A last case, same thing, same principles. Consignment exported, premises identified in South Africa. 3 suspects arrested, container on its way to Singapore. We applied the same principles, got it back. Malaysia, excellent cooperation at first, but we've lost that container. With regards to the foreign fishing fleet, there are some major cases underway. We cannot speak about them. They're current. But through the years, we've been working tirelessly. People have worked, has put in a tremendous amount of work. People like Dino Govender, I cannot mention all of them, but everybody that worked on this case, everybody we are grateful to everybody that participated and brought these cases to the extent where they are. They're not finalized, they're still ongoing. But the success here is that seven of those vessels, the Bahari Nusantara and the Bintang Sumudra Gelantos and Makoti Abada. You know, Yves de Koning that opened the ceremony yesterday, we went to Hout Bay, and the picture below was taken last Friday. And a South African owns 7 of those vessels now. And vessels that has been fully involved in IUU fishing, human rights violations, human trafficking, IUU fishing, fisheries crime. They are now owned by South African with the intention of providing a platform to disadvantaged coastal communities to focus not on abalone and rock lobster, but let's secure the offshore tuna resources, which are more sustainable, and focus on that. Instead of an IUU vessel benefiting from it, let a whole community like Paternoster or Houston or Hout Bay benefit from those resources through that action. 2 of those vessels, which makes it 9, have absconded right under our noses, but we're taking it with a pinch of salt, and those cases are currently being pursued as well. Tremendous work is being done, and we're hoping that in next year's symposium that we'll be able to report and to say similar like Mr. Benjes, here are the suspects, the convicted behind the case. Then the Harm 4 case done by Polo, FCO within the department, brilliant work done, continuous hard work, and that case was also brought to the point where asset forfeiture seized or forfeited the vessel. The challenges, I've touched on some of them, but you know, on our notice board within the MCS offices, we've got a notice board there with this media clipping. And it states that the South African economy is losing 4 billion per annum as a result of illegal fishing. We sat with Marcus Bergner from Traffic now recently, and that figure is still modest. You know, if you take at the value, somebody mentioned, I think it's Gunnar mentioned yesterday, if somebody steals something, theft is theft. Somehow it doesn't apply to South Africa, because we know of cases where 300, that syndicate that I mentioned last, sent out 10 of those containers. We managed to intercept 2. Most of them are sitting within the Far East. 8 stolen and taken out of the country. It's people's livelihoods stolen. And you know, I wonder if we would take the same approach if it was money, US dollars, diamonds,